Dozer, my blade is flat on the ground, and I'm initiating my float to do this, and I'm going to explain why in just a second. Also, worth mentioning, and I'm going to climb out of the cab now for this shutdown procedure. So you can see my dozer here. I'm going to get it to where you can see the rippers. Worth mentioning, while you can see the outside of the cab, you see the rippers are completely up in the upward position as well as tucked in underneath the rear of my machine. Remember, we talked about if we do not have these tucked, meaning like this, or facing all the way out, or exposed, whatever you want to call this, these being all the way in the outward position, you can imagine if I'm climbing down a slope as I come down to that flat part like we talked about, these rippers are going to dig in, and if that slope is something that I just graded, now we're going to do it again. The worst thing we can do as operators is move material any more times than we have to. So if I'm climbing over something, I want to be mindful of having those things tucked in, and I'm going to move them back just so we see what it looks like in the correct position as far as traveling goes. So this is what we want to look like when we're traveling. Also, while we have the outside view here, you can see my blade height. So if we're walking across the job site, I'm going to float it so that's all the way down. All I'm going to do is bring it up just, if I'm in the cab, just enough to see I've got a shadow behind the blade. The higher you bring the blade, the farther the shadow is going to come back away from the blade, letting the sunlight in. So as I'm looking at this, I want my shadow to be maybe 2 or 3 inches behind my blade. That's going to show me that I have it very, very close to the ground. The other thing I'm going to do, like we talked about just a second ago, is float. I'm letting the blade float right now. And what this is going to do is allow the blade to completely relax on the ground. If I just use, I'm going to bring my rippers back up one more time. Let's say I have my blade up in the air and we're going to park it for tonight. If I just set my blade down on the ground using the hydraulic functions like we're lowering the blade, what can happen is you have one side of the blade on the ground and the other side of the blade might be kind of floating in the air. And if you've been through our training sessions online here, you've heard me talk about this before, especially with excavators, loaders, dozers as well. Anything that has hydraulics is going to settle throughout the night. So in my mind, there's no problem in using my float right now, and all it's going to do is relax all the hydraulics. So whether my blade, let's say I'm focusing on sitting in the wrong spot right now. We want to be on flat ground, but let's say we're not on flat ground. If I float my blade and the right side of my blade is 6 inches off the ground, my left side is on the ground. I've had people come to our job sites while I worked in Florida and they look for shark's teeth in the afternoons all night long and even in the morning before we get to the job site. So let's say little Jimmy is climbing all over this dozer and they're talking for a second and his foot is sitting under this blade. Even though it's 20 hours after I have left this job site, there is no reason why this blade can't then just decide to go ahead and sink the rest of the way and relax those hydraulics. So by using my float mechanism, I know both of my up and down rams or my lift cylinders are relaxed. Then all I have to do is kind of wiggle my left or my right joystick, my blade control, right and left, just get it to all the way relax on the ground, making sure that we don't have any air under the corners. So parking on flat ground, that's why this is important. So we don't have any part of the blade floating up in the air.